welcome to today's WIEF I Empower on Global Trade Outlook 2022 and beyond. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me first introduce our moderator for today. She would be Dr. Evelyn S. Devadasan, Professor of the Faculty of Business and Economics, University Malaya, and she is currently serves as Editor-in-Chief to the Institutions and Economists Journal, Associate Editor to the International Journal of Social Economics, and member to the editorial board of the Journal of Contemporary Asia and International Journal of Rural Management. Now, please welcome Dr. Evelyn Devadasan. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this dialogue on the Global Trade Outlook 2022 and beyond, organized by the World Islamic Economic Forum Foundation. As mentioned, my name is Evelyn Devadasan of the University of Malaya, and I'm the moderator for this session. This dialogue or conversation today is indeed timely. We have heard a lot of predictions in the media about the trade outlook for 2022. While some feel that trade is going to normalize in 2022, there are others who believe that the outlook remains uncertain. So to address the outlook, or rather the future of trade from a global, national, and regional perspective, we have three eminent speakers. Allow me to introduce them. Our first speaker is Ms. Latifa Elbu Abdelouis, Director General of the Islamic Center for Development of Trade, in short ICDT, Morocco. Our second speaker is Dr. Lily Yan Ing, Lead Advisor for the Southeast Asia region at the Economic Research Institute for Asean and East Asia, known as AREA in Indonesia. And our final and third speaker is Mr. Muhammad Mustafa Abdul Aziz, Chief Executive Officer of the Malaysia External Trade Development Corporation, or MATRADE Malaysia. Big warm welcome to all three speakers. The three speakers will provide their take on some interesting issues, which include the following. Are trade fundamentals indeed going to be still solid, or is trade going to be still promising as predicted by many? Second, are supply chain disruptions here to stay? We have heard of supply chain disruptions during the pandemic and even way before the pandemic, during the China-US trade wars, when China-US trade wars erupted. So there are reasons to believe that the companies would rebalance and shorten their supply chains through strategies such as onshoring and nearshoring. So do you all see this happening? The third important question is, how are sustainable considerations or practices being played out along the supply chain, and especially in recent mega free trade agreements like the CPTPP? And finally, what are the new regulatory challenges arising from protectionism, which we saw during COVID-19, especially from the export side, as countries try to protect their own interests, and also from the challenges that emanate from the explosion of the digital trade. So to take on all these questions, we have these three speakers. Participants, you will be allowed to post your questions after all three speakers have made their presentation. So all three speakers will be given 10 minutes each, and it will follow with a Q&A. With that, allow me to first invite Mrs. Latifa to provide her take on some of those issues mentioned. Mrs. Latifa, over to you, please.
Thank you, Professor Evelyn. Good morning to everyone. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to extend my deepest thanks and gratitude to the WIEF Chairman, His Excellency Dr. Said Hamid Al-Bar, for inviting ICDT to join this important gathering on the Global Trade Outlook 2022 and beyond. Before I present to you the ICDT perspective to accompany OIC member states in their recovery strategies to face the challenges and disruption generated by the COVID-19 economic crisis, I want to begin by telling you a bit about OIC economy and the impact of COVID-19 on our countries. Ladies and gentlemen, As you are aware, OIC space possesses considerable potential in terms of trade and investments. Indeed, the 7 countries of our organization account more than 2 billion consumers, representing 25% of the world population. Half of this population is composed of young people under 25 years, a fact that explains the important increasing trend in the demand for direct consumption of goods and services, such as education, health, housing, and leisure in our countries. Moreover, the OIC space has enormous energy potential. OIC member countries account for more than 65% of the world's oil reserves and 58% of the world gas reserves. The OIC countries have also great potential in several promising sectors, for instance, agribusiness, mining, renewable energies, sustainable tourism, and halal economy. Despite this potential, the trade and investment figures at OIC zone fall short of our ambitions. Concerning trade flows, for example, the OIC share in the world trade is about 10%, equivalent to $4 trillion. The situation in terms of investments is not better. The OIC share in FDI does not exceed 8% of global investments flow. This situation that we are all trying to improve, each one at its own level, is a result of several factors. The most important are the persistence of some obstacles to trade, such as no-tariff barriers and administrative barriers, the weaknesses of trade infrastructures, and valorization of local product is still in its early stage. In addition to those structural obstacles in OIC countries, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a harmful impact on trade and investment flows in OIC zone. Ladies and gentlemen, the world economy has been affected considerably due to the COVID-19. Global merchandise trade fell by 9.2% in 2020, contributing to a 4.8% contraction in global GDP. The World Bank has predicted a loss of more than $10 trillion compared to the situation that would have prevailed without the pandemic. The total economic cost could be even higher due to the long effect on investments. Many countries, including our countries, OIC countries, experienced historical 5-year recession in 2020. Related to trade in particular, international flows has been severely altered. Unfortunately, it is beginning to recover. World trade growth is estimated at 4.7 in 2022 compared to 1.1 in 2021. The lack of diversification and lack of flexibility in the existing supply chain and sourcing strategies has worsened the ongoing supply chains. The effect of lockdowns of manufacturing hubs and demand shocks have spread to affect the hospitality, the travel sectors, the manufacturing activities, and sectoral output in general, notably in automotive, textile, and electronic industries. Export bans on food, pharmaceutical products, and other essential goods imposed by various governments across the globe has turned out to be a massive catastrophe for countries that are majorly dependent on such imports. Ladies and gentlemen, according to the ICDT study on impact of COVID-19 on trade and investment, OIC countries have not been an exception of this situation. Most OIC member states are developing countries and have seen their economy suffering from this crisis. Energy producing countries, for example, have been impacted by the substantial reduction in international oil prices. Also, the OIC countries, which are net food and medical product importers, have seen their food security and product health threatened. Industrial production and tourism, which are a very important sector for our economy in terms of job creation and exportation, have been impacted due to the closure of borders and breakdown of supply chain. However, the unique circumstances of the pandemic have also created some opportunities. Most countries have launched strategies to digitize their economies and to develop e-commerce. It was also an opportunity for those countries to initiate deep reforms to achieve their food and health sovereignty at national and regional levels. Ladies and gentlemen, to assist our member states to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic by implementing trade recovery strategies, ICDT initiated a new strategy 2022-2025. There are 4 interrelated elements to this strategy. I will be happy to go into further detail about any of these, but briefly they are related to Trade and Investment Facilitation Program, the Trade and Investment Corridors Program, the Regional Value Chain Program, and the Economic Intelligence Program. Ladies and gentlemen, looking back, it has been an unprecedented and challenging period for all of us at individual, national, and regional levels. Few of us would have imagined that this crisis could create such devastation on lives and economies. But this crisis has reinforced the importance of international and regional cooperation. It is more crucial than ever for us to work together to maintain cooperation, keep markets open, and develop regional supply chains. This webinar that allows us to share experiences and ideas is an excellent step in a right direction. Before concluding, I would like to reiterate my deepest thanks and gratitude to the chairman of the WIEF and his team, the Malaysian authorities, and the organizers of this important event. I would also like to seize this opportunity to express to you that ICDT will be more than happy to organize programs relating to the empowerment of women and youth, trade and investment promotion, tourism, and halal products with WIEF in partnership with our member states. I wish to panel at fruitful discussion, and thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Latifa. Mrs. Latifa has provided us an OIC perspective and also a sectoral perspective and the implications between investments and trade. Participants, please do engage with us by placing your questions as the presentations are ongoing. With that, allow me to invite Dr. Lily Yan Ying to provide her views on a regional outlook for trade, particularly ASEAN. Dr. Lily, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Devadasans. It's really such a great pleasure to be able to meet with all of you here today, and thank you so much for spending your time with us. I trust we're gonna learn from each other. In these sessions, let's discuss ASEAN's trade outlook. First, we review trends in global trade and how this will affect ASEAN's trade. Second, we will observe ASEAN trade and its international reserves. Last, we will conclude by discussing what ASEAN should do. So basically, we will see how ASEAN's trade in the coming decade, considering the current pandemic and the recent trends in the global trade. Next, in the backup of the COVID-19 pandemic, let me highlight 4 main trends in the global trade. First, multilateral trading systems has been stalled. Dispute settlement body is not functioning well. Development Doha agenda agreed back in 2001 has not been implemented well. The latest agreement was the WTO Trade Facilitations Agreement in 2013. Negotiations in many important areas have been stuck. Second, the rising US-China trade tensions, starting Trump slapping tariffs on 350 billion Chinese products. At the same time, there has been rising anti-globalizations. By 2021, about 18.8% of global trade have been affected by protectionism measures, 18.8% of global trade. These tensions is now even escalating instead of decreasing. And the competitions is now even extended to the competitions in technology. Third, supply chain security concerns. Even though the US and China reached the first trade deal in February 2020, the trade tensions is getting even worse. Recently, China just issued a dual circulation strategy. And even worse, the US also intensifies its technology reliance on domestic suppliers and implements so-called friend offshoring strategy. The last trend is sustainable trade and investments. Next. So what will be the implications for ASEAN, particularly ASEAN trade? Next. Despite the increased uncertainties and rising trade tensions, I'm at the optimist side. In 2021, we see the global trade start to be recovered. It was recorded at 28.5 trillion US dollar, which increased by 13% compared to the 2019 pre-pandemic level. In particular, I would highlight ASEAN trade was rebound mainly due to three main reasons. First, increase in ASEAN trade was partly due to recovery in the Chinese economy and trade, increase in productions and demand for health and medical supplies and equipment, mining, electronics and machinery, and partly due to increase in commodity prices, such as coal, ore, and palm oils. So these provide advantages for natural resource intensive countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, and to some extent Vietnam, who produce largely electronics and machinery these days, and Brunei. Second, there has been massive increase in demand for health, agricultural, and food products. These open up opportunities for agricultural intensive countries in ASEAN, such as Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. Third, rise in demand for Internet of Things and digital trade services. This really open new opportunities for countries like Singapore, who are largely IT intensive, which have very high skilled human capital, but also for countries like Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Next, so if we see closely the figures of ASEAN's trade, the figures here represents the value of total trade, total exports and imports of the 10 ASEAN countries. The blue column represents the value of total trade using the left-hand side axis. And you can see here that's in terms of US billion dollar. And the orange line represent the ratio of total trade to GDP using the right-hand side axis in terms of percentage. So the figure tells us after substantial drops in 2019 and 2020 due to the COVID pandemic, ASEAN trade bounced back and was recorded at 3.9 trillion US dollar in 2021. It increased about 11% compared to the 2019 pre-pandemic level. So ASEAN's contribute 3.9 trillion out of 28.5 trillion global trade in 2021. Next, along with the increase ASEAN's trade, ASEAN's also have good positions in terms of reserves. Next on reserves. No, on the reserve. So we can see the reserve here. I don't know why it doesn't appear well. Does it appear at reserve? Raihan? Okay, so here I want to show you the reserve, the international reserves. What I prepare is that ASEAN's international reserves has been also in the good positions. ASEAN's recorded a total reserves of 11.4 trillion US dollar or about 7.3 months of its total imports. So most of ASEAN countries have more than 6 months imports coverage, except Laos and Vietnam, which had about 3 and 4 months coverage. So all in all, ASEAN shows bouncing in trade and good positions in its international reserves. Next. So considering that the global trade and the 4 trends that all countries have experienced, what can ASEAN do? The way ahead, first, this is the fact that the WTO has not been functioning and will not be functioning well. I do not see that the US will move any step forward to settle the issue of dispute settlements, and the negotiations has been stalled in many of important areas. So ASEAN should optimize its bilateral, regional, and plurilateral agreements. Recently, ASEAN is a member of the RCEP countries. RCEP is the largest mega FTA, covering about 1/3 of global populations, global trade, global GDP, and global foreign direct investments. So ASEAN should ensure the RCEP well implemented to ensure the smooth supply chains in the regions and the movement of goods, services, and capital. Second, we should keep our neutral stand toward the US and China and engage more with middle powers. ASEAN should also start to diversify both import sources and export destinations and exploring non-traditional markets. Third and last, on digital transformations and sustainable trade and investments. Let me give you a simple examples. I have 2 daughters who are now just 8 and 11 years old. They don't use plastic straws. They are picking trash in the sea after they are finished surfing. They read sad news that only 1% of vaccines distributed to less income countries. And they are aware that many students indeed cannot access to decent educations. My girls are a part of markets. Their generations is the market that we will face in the coming decades. They are technology savvy. They are aware of sustainable development. So it is our responsibility, ASEAN responsibility as a global community, to ensure that ASEAN's businesses and all other issues should be able to operate, to conduct, and to deliver our products and services in more sustainable ways, aiming to have zero inequality, zero unemployment, and zero carbon dioxides. I'm looking forward to have more discussions with you in the Q&A sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lily, for that regional perspective. There are already a few questions in store on the China factor. We'll come back to you on this. Having heard the regional perspective, that is the ASEAN's trade outlook, can we move on to Mr. Muhammad Mustafa, who will give us his views on the Malaysian perspective. Mr. Mustafa, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Evelyn. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our viewers from all over the world. I'm honored to be invited to today's webinar entitled Global Trade Outlook 2022 and Beyond, organized by WIEF. Very interesting topic, which I will definitely share with you our trade performance last year. And in fact, in the coming years, we are looking for a positive sign, which I believe also be enjoyed by other countries and also our ASEAN members. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, indeed, international trade is a key contributor to Malaysia's economic growth and development. As Malaysia's National Trade Promotion Agency under the Ministry of International Trade Industry, or MITI, Malaysia External Trade Development Corporation, or MATRADE, is committed to support Malaysian companies to be at the forefront of the global market. Through our 46 overseas network around the globe, as well as our 5 regional offices in Malaysia, Matrix works earnestly to ensure Malaysia's brand soar high in the international arena. We put in all efforts to ensure the continuity and growth of Malaysia's exports in line with the aspiration of the Malaysian government as stipulated in the 12th Malaysian Plan. Now, a global trade scenario in 2021, briefly, year 2021 witnessed a robust world trade performance which rebounded from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, albeit disruptions in the global supply chain and elevated shipping costs. Though badly affected at the beginning, Malaysian business community rebounded quickly, supported by many government initiatives, and has remained resilient thanks to the strong global demand, external demand, which led to resurgence in trade activities. The Matrix contributed to the efforts of the government through export promotions and exporters development programs, and I am delighted to share is that these programs bear fruit with billions of ringgit generated by participating Malaysian companies. Next, please. Now, briefly, on the Malaysia's trade performance, I always use this phrase, rain or shine, the show must go on. And the pandemic caused major disruptions, nobody can deny that, to the manufacturing activities and also affected the global trade since most countries around the world were under some form of lockdown to contain the spread of COVID-19. Malaysia's export showed downward trend due to the movement control order implemented in March 2020. Subsequently, Matrix, being the trade promotion agency of the government of Malaysia, we took fast action by conducting a survey with responses received from the affected Malaysian companies comprising mainly SMEs, and it revealed that businesses were badly affected due to loss of contracts and orders, resulting in loss of revenue. We quickly responded to the situation by identifying the areas where exporters were hit the worst and look for remedial solutions with the government to help bring the economy back on track. Malaysia exporters suffered severely from this situation, and as an alternative, Matrix started to utilize digital technology to conduct online business meetings, or as we term as e-BizMatch. If I can share with you, last year, we managed to connect almost 1,000 importers or buyers with 1,500 Malaysian exporters last year. It was such a great achievement from our side, as we believe that we need to continue connecting the buyers and sellers frequently. Other digital initiatives for export promotions that include virtual exhibitions, online business pitching, and webinars are also executed. And these initiatives are very much appreciated by the business community in lieu of reducing the expenses. All of these efforts to support Malaysia's exports have shown positive growth trajectory since then, following the progressive opening of the economy and gradual recovery of the external demand. If I can share with you also the initiative and efforts taken by the government of Malaysia in terms of getting the people to be vaccinated, it showed a positive progress where almost 99% of the adults in Malaysia have been inoculated, and the process of vaccinating the youngsters, the students, is still ongoing. So all in all, we have about almost 82% or almost 82% of the population have been vaccinated. Now, remarkably, in 2021, Malaysia's trade recorded a new milestone, crossing $500 billion mark for the first time, with exports almost reaching $300 billion. Trade, exports, imports, and trade surplus soared to an all-time high for the year. In terms of value, exports have achieved 99% of the 12th Malaysian Plan target for 2025, 4 years ahead of the projection. For 2025, under the 12th Malaysian Plan, our export target is at 1.252 trillion ringgit. And last year, we achieved 1.24 trillion ringgit, which we mentioned just now, almost 99%. which was 4 years ahead of the projection. Now, to continue this momentum, Madrid, again, as the National Export Promotion Agency of the Government of Malaysia, has outlined 3 agendas, important agendas, big agendas to strengthen Malaysian companies' resilience in the global market, which are: 1, implementing programs and activities aligned with the National Trade Blueprint. This is a strategic plan, outlines 5-year timeframe development strategy from 2021 to 2025 to position Malaysia as a dynamic and preeminent trading nations through sustainable export development. Secondly, we are embarking aggressively on our sustainability agenda. And finally, adopting digitalization. Now, Madrid pivoted our approach in implementing export promotion and exporters development programs towards a digital culture and sustainability initiative for the benefit of the Malaysian business community. Ladies and gentlemen, performance of key sectors. In 2021, manufactured goods were the
Mr.
largest.
Mustafa, 1 minute. Sorry to interject, 1 minute. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Mustafa, can you hear me?
Can I continue now?
Mr. Mustafa, can you hear
Yeah.
me?
Yes.
Sure. About 1 minute left. Yeah. Sorry to interject.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Briefly, performance of the key markets as seen here, over 50% share of markets of Malaysia trade exports and imports were dominated by 5 key markets, namely China, Singapore, US, Japan, and Taiwan. And apart from the 5 listed major export-import products, let me share with you the products that we highly demanded from us, basically E&E and rubber glove in the health sector for hygiene factors. Now, briefly on the FTAs, Malaysia exporters to receive preferential treatments for better market access. To date, we have signed 16 bilateral as well as regional FTAs. Definitely, we will, Malaysian companies as well as those in tourists will definitely benefit from these FTAs that we signed. So, on the outlook, impact of the pandemic on trade and development, we believe that this year, Madrid will definitely continue to outline high impact exporters development and export promotion programs to strengthen Malaysia's positions as one of the world's top exporters. And now, as published in the Economic Outlook 2022 by Ministry of Finance, Malaysia's gross domestic product is anticipated to expand by 5.5 to 6.5%, and trade is expected to grow by 1.6%, while exports and imports are estimated to increase by 1.5 to 1.7%. For 2022, briefly, starting strong, Malaysia's trade in January 2022 continued to be resilient with trade, export, imports, and trade surplus registered highest monthly value for January. Trade expanded by 20.3% and exports by 91.1%, as well as imports by 21.8%. I think that's basically what I would like to cover in my presentation, and we look forward for active participation from your viewers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mustafa. Sorry for interjecting there, but I'm sure the participants would have a lot of questions for you based on your slides. We'll start with the first round of questions. If I could start with, I will pose a few questions, group a few questions, and we'll go around the speakers and we'll come back with the second set. We have one question here from Sarah Ellie. Why is China so important to the global economy? Dr. Lily, if I could pose that question to you, because you mentioned about the China factor and how ASEAN rebounded, but there are also concerns about our exposure to China because of the closed business cycle synchronization. So what would be the risk for ASEAN, if I could add on to Sarah Ellie's question? The second question is, if I could actually forward it to Mrs. Latifa. You spoke a lot about agriculture trade and the implications for trade and investment. What about inclusive trade? how is it shaping in your part of the world, especially since informal cross-border trade is quite rampant over there, and it involves a lot of women entrepreneurs who are engaged in informal cross-border trade. For Mr. Mustafa, if you could add a bit on, there's one question from Encik Huzaimi Hamid. Of the export and import numbers, what is the respective percentages of final goods and intermediate goods in the case of Malaysia? And you could also take on one question, which is a bit more global. I leave it to the participants. How fast can we expect for the global economy to rebound? From Zubaida. And one additional question for Dr. Lily. I know you're familiar with trade regulations, non-tariff measures. There's one question on trade regulations during the pandemic. You mentioned rising protectionism, and so where would the direction be? How do you think it will accelerate? And you did talk a bit about this. And one specific question from Fatu Hidayat for you on what can the G20 do under the Indonesian presidency in the trade and I guess to support trade and investment. So with that, can I start with Dr. Lily and then Mr. Mustafa and finally Mrs. Latifa.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that's very important questions. I mean, we can see China has been surpassing the US since 2019 in terms of largest trade. So China is now like about 25% of global trade, contributes to 25% of global trade. And out of the 28.5 trillion US dollar of global trade, around 10 trillion are basically intermediate goods, which are largely also contributed by China. So that's how important China, not only for ASEAN, but also for the global trade. And with this kind of power in terms of global GDP, global trade, China also have a very strong reserves. In 2021, China recorded the largest trade surplus of 676 billion US dollar. That's the largest trade surplus that China has ever recorded. And most of the reserves, China also buy many of government bonds, including 90.5% of US governing board are retained by China. So this is how big China is in the current economy and in the coming decades. Then it's really important, like the more or the higher power will come with higher responsibilities, you know. So what will be the best way for China is that China try to diversify. I mean, instead of concentrating its power in domestic countries, China should diversify into its neighbor countries, including Southeast Asia. But at the same time, what would be the implications for ASEAN? As I would suggest, ASEAN currently relies a lot on the Chinese economy. Considering the current US-China trade tensions, it might also be good for ASEAN to try to diversify its import sources, as well as diversify its export destinations, exploring non-traditional markets. So that's number one. Should I answer directly to number two, or should we take around, Dr. Devadasan?
You can go ahead, Dr. Lily. Yeah.
Okay, in terms of non-tariff measures, Dr. Devadasan is one of the experts in Malaysia in ASEAN in terms of non-tariff measures. She contributes to the development of database of the ASEAN countries, so she knows massively on non-tariff measures and how this affect global trade. You know, like we can imagine one day global trade with zero tariffs, okay? But it will not be possible with zero non-tariff measures. Why? Because non-tariff measures we should perceive it as neutral. Some of them are indeed very good. They serve to protect our health, safety, and environmental protections. So we should see non-tariff measures as neutral because many of them serve for the best of human life purposes. But at the same time, many countries recently put their hidden protections in regulations. then what will be the best way to deal with this issue? One is that at ASEAN level, I think we should have a national and regional discipline. So we should each other make it all regulations transparent. That's number one. Number two, we should have a public consultations, including with our trading partners, think tanks, and customers. So we know that our regulations serve its base for its purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lily. Over to you, Encik Mustafa.
Dr. Evelyn, can you just repeat the question just now?
There's a specific question on the shares of final and intermediate goods and final goods. I guess that question is more on the share of intermediate goods in final goods, both from the import and export perspectives. And if you would like to probably just chip in also on the other question on the outlook, global outlook, how fast do you expect global trade to rebound?
Okay, for the first question,
if you could take on.
Yeah, for this first question, if I can just respond by sharing with the viewers or listeners on the exports of our Malaysian products, the top 5 of Malaysian products to the world, namely E&E products, followed by palm and palm oil-based products, as well as the medical-related products. Offhand, I do not have the details of the rest of the products that you're referring to, but if you can see on the slides that the 5 major products that grew significantly and contributed almost 60% of our exports and imports, you can see on the screen E&E definitely contributing almost 37%, petroleum, palm oil, chemical, and rubber. So that products represent almost 60%, while on the import side, E&E, chemical product, petroleum, machinery, and manufacturing also represent almost 33.1%. That is the composition of Malaysian products exported as well as imported. Now, on the future outlook, if I can say this, we believe that based on the reports that we gather, the global trade is predicted to grow by 70% to almost USD 30 trillion, and by 2030, and 13 markets across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East will shape the future and drive much of this growth. And Malaysia definitely will be one of the key drivers of this global trade growth. And we believe that India, China, and Singapore will be the key corridors for Malaysia from 2020 to 2030. And the 5 important findings which was reviewed by the Standard Chartered in its reports, Future of Trade 2030 Trends and Markets to Watch report. 5 trends, namely wider adoption of sustainable and fair trade practices. Number 2, more inclusive trade, greater risk diversification, digitization, and an accelerated shift towards high growth emerging markets. So if you look at these findings reviewed by Standard Chartered, definitely I believe the global outlook for a trade will be on a positive note. And Malaysia is experiencing it now, and we will definitely push aggressively the export agenda, and we have to maintain the momentum. Thank you.
Thank you, Encik Mustafa. Mrs. Latifah.
Mrs. Evelyn, I want to just, if you allow me, before responding to your question, I want just to tell that I'm fully agree with Mrs. Lily when she talked about tariff barriers, their importance for protecting health, environment, security. I'm fully agree with you, but I think that we should ensure that their barriers do not limit trade and investment among our countries. It is important to have standards and norms to protect our lives, our health, our environment, but we should also work together to limit their impact by notably developing bilateral agreements, recognitions, agreements on trend and on standards and norms, capacity building, and information. Concerning your question about informal cross-border trade, especially for agriculture products, this is yes, this is a real problem for our countries. At ICDT, we believe that we can fight this phenomenon by developing specific programs for our countries, especially in African countries, programs that should reduce this commerce, should be focused on building capacity of producers, establishing of norms and standards. We also should improve our trade by programs of trade facilitation. And at ICDT, we have a very wide program on trade facilitation that provide capacity building program, assisting countries to develop regulation and standards, organization of fairs and exhibition to present and to make linkage between producer and importers in all our zone.
Thank you, Mrs. Latifa. There's one question on the links between non-tariff measures and sustainability. We talk about the SDGs today. So Bushra Amber has posed this question, and also what are your thoughts on regulatory heterogeneity? And I think this is prevalent in a lot of blocs, even in RCEP or even in ASEAN. If I could pose this question to Dr. Lily. Dr. Lily, please.
You just sound so very econometrician. Yeah, I mean, like, as I mentioned, I mean, non-tariff measures are good to some extent. And I totally agree with Director General Latifa in the sense, like, some of the a subset of non-tariff measures can be non-tariff barriers. And that will be a barriers for trade as well as investments. In terms of sustainability, yes, I mean, as I explained, non-tariff measures, some of them can be, I mean, like initial purposes or the authentic objective of non-tariff measures also serve as to protect our environment. So, like, for example, we limit to export certain natural resource intensive products, or we reserve our sea, our like original like natural resource intensive products, but then the case there's so many barriers hidden in non-tariff measures. So in terms of sustainability, I think if the customers can put such pressures to the governments to have good regulations, I think the government will to some extent listens to, as I mentioned, I mean, the current generations, they're very aware on sustainable development issues. They're very aware on how severe climate change has affected their life. So if customers put that kind of pressures, I believe that the governments will take into account their pressures and translate it into good regulations. But first things first on non-tariff measures is that one, we should improve transparency of non-tariff measures across the globe. And secondly, we should have this kind of discipline mechanisms so that there's kind of stick and carrot for the governments who don't perform or who issues non-tariff measures that can be barriers. So there's supposed to be kind of disciplines either at the national level or bilateral or regional levels.
Thank you, Dr. Lily. Mr. Mustafa, if I could ask you, based on your experience engaging with the industry, how has the industry responded to sustainability practices, ESGs, and also how do you think this will take shape, and where is Malaysia positioned in terms of sustainable trade?
Okay, yeah, Dr. Evelyn. Definitely, the subject of sustainability has been the in thing now. Everybody is talking about it. Let me just touch on the level of awareness among the SMEs. Let's not talk about the MNCs, the PLCs. They are actually embarking aggressively in terms of addressing the sustainability issues. Now, for us, it is important to engage with the SMEs, especially in terms of increasing the level of awareness and also to educate them the importance of integrating the sustainability in their business model. For the fact that the ESG principles need to be addressed carefully if they want to be relevant in the international trade. Now, the initiative to encourage Malaysian exporters in adopting sustainability provides a strong value proposition for Malaysian exporters, in which more and more consumers are demanding products and services that are ethically obtained and adhere to the ESG principles. So it is imperative for companies to gradually progress to a new sustainable standard to participate in future trade. Globally, governments are setting their emissions target, and the ongoing climate crisis also is a massive wake-up call, and it's heartening to note that Malaysia is committed to becoming a net zero greenhouse gas emissions nation as early as 2050. Now, what we have done so far as the National Trade Promotion Agency, we have already embarked on the sustainability agenda back in 2018. We have a program called SAVE, SAVA, Sustainability Action Values for Exporters. Again, as I said, it is our role to continue engaging with the Malaysian companies on the importance of them, which we believe that growing sustainably and responsibly is vital as the economy recuperates from the impact brought about by COVID-19. And we have seen progress made by Malaysian companies, especially when there are issues of social aspect of it, as well as on the governance part of it. So to ensure that we are Malaysian exporters are able to continue exporting their products and services to our, not only to our traditional market, but also to new emerging markets. I think the compliance to ESG principles should be taken seriously. And we are actually on the right path, I would say so, because the ministries, agencies concerned are taking a lot of initiative and efforts in terms of creating the level of awareness as well to educate the Malaysian business community.
Thank you, Encik Mustafa. If I could move on to Mrs. Latifah, on the issue of sustainability, you have signed agreements here with countries such as OIC has with US. How has this panned out in the case of OIC? And if you could give some views, OIC is engaged a lot in food trade, and I'm quite interested to look at this case of halal food trade, halal and cosmetics. So how is it working in your part of the world?
Thank you, Mrs. Evelyn. Halal industry, halal economy in general is at top priorities of all our countries. It's a priority of OIC, of Islamic Development Bank, and we are all working on developing this industry. This economy. Unfortunately, when we see figures, global figures, in top 20 of countries, exporter countries of halal products, we have only 4 countries. And I think this is something that we should address rapidly. To do that, we have to work on some programs. First one, production. We should support producer in this field. We have a great potential, but we need to work on norm. We are very far for halal norm halal that is generated for all our countries. Secondly, we should to support SMEs in all our countries. We should also organize exhibition and fairs about these products. At ICDT, for example, for this year, we have two fairs or exhibition about halal products in Tunisia in September and in Istanbul in November. We are also working at ICDT to elaborate a annual report on trade halal in our zone. We will have the first edition of this report on June of this year, and we also will have a dashboard about halal products that will allow us to have information about these important sector regularly. So we are aware about the importance of this sector, and we are at OIC and its institutions working on this subject. Each institution at its specialization. We have the SMIC, which work on regulation and halal standards. CISRIC work on training related to halal standards, and ICDT, we are working on information and promotion concerning this sector.
Okay, thank you so much. Before we conclude, we have heard a bit about protectionism. We have heard about supply chain issues. We have heard about remotely about inclusive trade and a bit about sustainable trade. So there are varying issues here, and these are times that are exciting because nobody knows how trade will take its turn in 2022, though there's speculation. So based on your experiences, if I could pose this general question to conclude the session, what do you think would be the most important factor to watch closely, at least in the medium term in 2022 or 2023 and beyond? And in short, what do you think would be an obstacle to the trade growth outlook, at least? So if I could have your final thoughts that will become some key takeaways for us as listeners in the spirit of the theme of this dialogue today on the trade outlook. If I could start with Mrs. Latifa and then to Dr. Lily and Mr. Mustafa. So what do you think would be the most important factor that we should actually watch closely, at least from your experience or from your region? Thank you.
For us at ICDT, we believe that the most important on which we must work closely next year are the trade facilitation. We must work on trade facilitation between and among our member countries. The second issue is to focus all our efforts on value chains and to develop, the objective is to develop regional value chains, onshore and nearshore value chains. The third issue that we should address urgently is capacity building of our SMEs to help them to prepare new normal and post-COVID situation.
Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Lily.
Thank you. Let me conclude by highlight the importance of G20. G20 cover about 80% of global populations, global GDP, global trade and investments. So that's how huge and important G20 countries is. And this year chairmanship is crucial, not only for G20 members, but also for the world. Indonesia, to represent developing countries, I think should take more active participations in provide voices for developing countries, not only for ASEAN, but for all developing countries in the world. And that's why we highlight on one, economic recovery. I think this is the first time we should pay and put how much health sectors and health indicators really crucial for this long run economic growth and sustainable of trade and investments. The discussion should include about the exit strategy of fiscal interventions as well as debt restructuring. That's crucial for developing countries. Second, on digital transformations. While all necessity infrastructure is important, digital transformations at the end of the day, it's about people. So it's very important to ensure global G20 to ensure global access to basic educations, to improving skills for all people across nations, particularly in facilitating to be able to access to digital transformations. The last but not least is sustainable developments. It's gonna very important to provide guidelines for businesses for all sectors around the world, how we should be able to pay attention on sustainable developments. So the way we operationalize, the way we conduct business, the way we conduct all delivering our products and services should be taken into account in more sustainable ways and how that will impact our environment and earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lily. Mr. Mustafa, over to you, please.
Well, I would like to conclude our session today by highlighting two important points. One, the pandemic definitely left a big scar on us, and the level of preparedness and readiness of the business community were not there, where we were not prepared in that sense, where from nobody expected that online businesses will become a business that will allow the business community to really survive in such a situation. So I believe that the globalization really needs to be reset to make it more equitable, so that entrepreneurs and SMEs have a chance to participate in the global supply chain. And doing so, you have to look in the areas of, as I said, 2 points. One is the sustainability aspect. The other one is on the digitalization aspect of it. It is important for us to be in that supply chain as not to disengage from that business of yours, where the disruption would definitely affecting everyone. So you must find other options in terms of continuity, and in doing so, I think the business community have to really look sustainability aspect through digitalization. So in order for you to sustain in the business environment now, especially very challenging, you need to really adopt these two things, to these two areas. That's basically my take on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Encik Mustafa. I would like to thank all three speakers for giving their views. I'm sure participants, you would have learned a lot. We've tried to cover as many angles as possible on the trade outlook, looking at the supply chain story, sustainable trade, looking at trade policies, NTMs and protectionism, and also looking at digital trade. So I hope participants have benefited as much as I have, and I also thank the participants for being engaging in posting all those questions. With that, thank you everyone. With that, I'll hand over to the organizer. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to our distinguished guests for being here today and making this webinar successful. Now, thank you to all. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. We truly hope that you've gained valuable inputs and ideas. Now, on behalf of WIEF Foundation, thank you for joining us today. Stay safe and have a great day ahead.